My name is Clarissa, I am 31 years old, and last weekend I found myself caught in a situation so ridiculous, so unbelievably self-centered and manipulative, that it felt like I had stepped into a badly written sitcom, except this one ended with the police involved, a family blow-up, and me wondering how my own brother could be so shameless. All I had wanted was one peaceful day at the spa, one single day of silence, eucalyptus steam, and lavender oil massages. But my brother had other plans. And what he did? It backfired in a way he never saw coming. This story is not just about selfishness, it is about what happens when someone pushes their luck too far, crossing a line so clear that even the most patient person would snap. I was not just the victim of his manipulation. I became the reason he will never pull this kind of stunt again. It started on a Saturday morning in downtown Dallas. I had booked a full-day reservation at a luxury spa I had been dying to visit for months. This was not just a pedicure and go kind of deal. We are talking about a steam room experience, deep tissue massages, seaweed wraps, hot stone therapy, aromatherapy facials, and a quiet room where you could nap under soft linen sheets. I had planned it all. I even turned off my phone notifications for the first time in months. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. But then, that same morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my brother, Thomas. He was asking me to help out and watch his kids, two high-energy boys under the age of 10, just for a few hours so he could catch his breath. I did not respond right away because I already knew where this was going. The last time I agreed to just a few hours, I ended up trapped in his apartment for 8 hours while he went out drinking with his friends, only for me to find out through Instagram stories. This time I had promised myself I would not be tricked. So when I finally replied, I said no. Politely but firmly. I reminded him that I had a spa reservation and that I had told everyone about it days ago. I said I was unavailable and needed some time for myself. He did not respond. No begging. No arguing. No guilt trip texts. Just silence. Which, in hindsight, should have told me everything I needed to know. I arrived at the spa at 11 a.m. sharp. It was located in Uptown, one of the more upscale areas of Dallas, with floor-to-ceiling windows, granite flooring, soft music humming from the walls, and the scent of lemongrass everywhere. I changed into my robe, put my phone in a locker, and stepped into a cocoon of relaxation. I thought the worst thing I would have to deal with was the temperature of the sauna. I had no idea that my brother had already dropped his kids off. He did not tell me. He did not ask again. He just packed up their backpacks, drove them to the spa, and left them outside by the reception entrance. Not even the waiting lounge. Not even a chair. Just left them there, unsupervised, like I was supposed to stumble out and discover them and, magically drop everything and become their unpaid babysitter while covered in seaweed wrap. But his plan had a fatal flaw. It relied on the idea that I would be the one to see them. Instead, it was the security guard. The spa had private security stationed discreetly at the side entrance and front lobby. A man named Reggie, a retired Dallas cop in his 50s who did not miss much, saw two unattended children sitting on a bench for over 20 minutes, looking lost and holding juice boxes. He approached them and asked why they were there, who they were waiting for. The kids said they were here to see their aunt, that their dad said she would come out soon and take them home with her. Reggie, not amused, notified the front desk, who checked the appointment list. My name was there, but I was deep inside the massage wing with no access to my phone. So, they called the police. Standard protocol. Two unattended minors, no legal guardian in sight, no emergency contact, no one who worked there claiming responsibility. The receptionist was in panic mode. Reggie kept the boys calm, and within 20 minutes, two uniformed officers from the Dallas Police Department were outside, trying to figure out what in the world was going on. Meanwhile, I was lying on a sunbed in the relaxation room, cucumber slices on my eyes, a clay mask on my face, absolutely unaware that my brother's grand plan was unraveling with flashing lights and badge numbers. That was when my phone, which I had left on silent in the locker, started vibrating violently. 1 missed call. 2. 7. 12. Finally, an attendant came and lightly tapped me on the shoulder. She whispered that there was a call for me and that it seemed urgent. I wiped off the mask, still drowsy from bliss, and picked up the phone at the front desk. It was Thomas. And he was livid. He was screaming into the phone, asking me how I could do this, how I could call the cops on his children, what kind of monster I was. He said I had traumatized them, that they were crying and scared, and that I should be ashamed of myself. I stood there frozen, still holding the warm towel they had given me just minutes earlier. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. I had not seen his kids. I had not even checked my phone. I was mid-treatment. I said I never called anyone. He accused me of lying. Said he knew it was me. That no one else would do this. That I was selfish, heartless, and dead to him. Then he hung up. Just like that. I stood there, phone buzzing with more unread messages and missed calls, my head spinning. I looked at the receptionist, who looked at me with wide eyes and said the children had already been taken to a nearby precinct just for safety while they waited for their father to pick them up. I could not move. I could not speak. I was shocked. Not because the police were involved, not even because I was being blamed. I was shocked because I did not understand what was happening. I had said no. I had removed myself from the situation. And somehow, without my consent, I had been dragged into a scheme I never agreed to. All I wanted was peace. And now I was being treated like the villain in a story I had not written. As I stood in that quiet lobby, surrounded by polished marble, soft music, and spa attendants offering lemon water, I realized something that shook me. My brother had not just ignored my refusal, he had decided that my time, my plans, my personal space meant nothing. He tried to force me to care for his children through trickery and then blamed me when reality did not bend to his fantasy. But what he failed to predict was that I would not be the one who would have to explain myself to the police. He would. And he did. And this was only the beginning. Update 1. 2 days after that surreal confrontation on the phone, I had finally managed to pull myself out of the haze of confusion and betrayal. I had returned to work at my real estate office in Plano, trying to ignore the dozens of missed calls from family members who had apparently gotten wind of what happened at the spa. My brother had not said a word since his angry tirade, which should have been a relief, but the silence only felt heavier with each passing hour. I had started to believe that the nightmare had ended. That somehow, despite his reckless stunt, he had at least had the sense to realize that dropping his kids off without telling me, and then blaming me for their detainment, was not just inappropriate, it was outrageous. Then the letter came. It was in my mailbox, nestled between a real estate flyer and a utility bill. A thick white envelope with a court seal stamped on the front. At first I thought it was a mistake. I was not involved in anything legal. I had done nothing wrong. I had not been called to testify or serve jury duty. But the envelope had my name on it, Clarissa May Collins, and it was real. Inside was an official notice. I was being summoned to appear before the Dallas County Family Court. The petitioner's name was listed clearly on the first page. Thomas Collins. My own brother. I must have read the name 5 times before I dropped the paper. For a moment, I thought it was some twisted prank. Some ridiculous bureaucratic error. I stood there, frozen in my hallway, the echo of my breath loud in my ears as the paper slipped from my fingers and landed near my heels. He had filed a lawsuit. And I had no idea why. It took everything in me to sit down, pick it up again, and start reading through the contents. His complaint was written in stark legal language, cold and calculated, nothing like the emotionally charged phone call from 2 days earlier. The words blurred together until I saw phrases like child endangerment, willful neglect, and emotional trauma caused by abandonment. I felt bile rise in my throat. He was accusing me of harming his children. Of intentionally leaving them outside. Of orchestrating their detainment as a form of punishment against him. My head started to spin as I realized this was not just some petty sibling spat. This was an official accusation with legal consequences. He was trying to make me a legal scapegoat for his own reckless parenting. I could not process it. I could not breathe. The next morning, I called a law firm in the Bishop Arts District that had represented one of my colleagues during a housing dispute. I explained the situation as best I could over the phone, stumbling through my words, barely holding my composure together. The receptionist scheduled an emergency consultation for that same afternoon. When I arrived, I was a wreck, hair tied back hastily, notes clutched in my trembling hands, face pale and stretched from lack of sleep. My assigned attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sandra Green, read through the complaint with narrowed eyes. Her expression darkened with each page. She asked questions. I answered them as calmly as I could. I explained the spa day, the phone call, the security guard, the police involvement. I showed her my appointment confirmation from the spa, the receipt, the names of the spa staff. I gave her every fact I could remember, and even the ones I wished I could forget. She took notes rapidly, already outlining her defense strategy before I could finish speaking. She told me that people like my brother were the reason courts existed in the first place. But no matter how confident she sounded, I could not shake the dread. The court date came quickly. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived early, dressed in a simple gray suit and clutching a manila folder filled with spa records, receipts, time-stamped messages, and a copy of the police report that had been filed when the children were found unattended. I sat silently next to Sandra in the hallway, my nerves prickling under my skin. The courthouse smelled like old paper, coffee, and floor wax. Every time a door opened, I flinched. And then I saw him. Thomas walked in wearing a smug expression and a rented suit that hung off his shoulders like it did not belong to him. He did not even look at me. He sat down across the hallway, phone in hand, casually scrolling as though he were waiting for a dentist appointment. I studied his face, looking for some trace of guilt or regret, some sign that he understood the insanity of what he had done. But there was none. His jaw was tight, his eyes unfazed, his entire demeanor so repulsive that it took everything in me not to stand up and scream. When our case was finally called, I followed Sandra into the courtroom with shaking legs. The judge was a stern woman in her late 50s who looked like she had no time for foolishness, which gave me a sliver of hope. Thomas presented his claims first, through a lawyer he had somehow convinced to take on his fantasy of a case. He painted himself as a desperate father, as someone betrayed by his sister, as a man trying to hold his family together despite malicious attempts to tear it apart. He described how I had offered to help, how I had encouraged him to drop the kids off, how I had cruelly abandoned them in public without warning. He used words like malicious intent and retaliation and emotional cruelty. I could barely contain my disbelief. He had fabricated the entire thing from start to finish. He turned the story inside out until I was the villain and he was the wounded hero. I stared at him across the courtroom, my mouth dry, my fists clenched at my sides. Then it was my turn. Sandra rose, calm and collected, and began to dismantle his version of events with surgical precision. She presented evidence. She quoted timestamps. She cited the spa's surveillance logs and the front desk report that showed I never left the building. She presented the written statement from Reggie, the security guard, who had detailed exactly how and when the children were found. She read the police report aloud. And she ended with a chilling fact, that not once had my brother ever attempted to contact me that day until the police were already involved. As she spoke, I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding like war drums, my eyes locked on the face of the man who shared my blood but clearly not my conscience. And still, through it all, I could not believe what I was witnessing. Because as the judge shuffled through the paperwork and took a long pause before speaking, I realized something that made my stomach drop. I was not just being accused. I was being sued. Sued by my own brother. And the worst part? He truly believed he could win. Update 2. By the time the second hearing began, I thought I had already experienced the worst possible betrayal a sibling could inflict. I was wrong. What happened next redefined my understanding of cruelty, calculation, and how far someone was willing to go to save themselves at another person's expense. I walked into the courtroom that morning already exhausted. The previous days had been a blur of legal paperwork, sleepless nights, and that constant tight pressure in my chest that never seemed to ease. I believed I understood the case. I believed I knew what I was being accused of. I thought this was about my brother trying to dodge responsibility for abandoning his children and shifting blame onto me. That alone was vile enough. I did not yet understand the full scope of his plan. As the hearing progressed, the atmosphere in the room changed. The judge asked for clarification on the nature of the accusations, and my brother's attorney submitted additional documents that had not been discussed during the first appearance. Papers were passed forward. The judge adjusted her glasses and began reading more carefully. I noticed Sandra stiffen beside me, her pen pausing mid-note, her jaw tightening in a way that immediately put me on edge. Then it happened. The judge summarized the allegations on record, and suddenly the words no longer matched reality as I knew it. I was not just being accused of negligence toward my brother's children. I was being accused of neglecting my own children. According to the filings, I had left my minor dependents unattended outside a commercial establishment, knowingly and intentionally, placing them in danger. The language was precise. Deliberate. Crafted. My brain refused to accept it at first. I felt like I was listening to someone else's case. I did not have children. I had never had children. I had never claimed to have children. And yet, there it was, written into a legal complaint as if it were an unquestionable fact. The realization hit me in slow motion. My brother had not only rewritten the events. He had rewritten reality. He had framed the case in a way that deliberately blurred the identities of the children involved. He had omitted his own parental status in key sections and replaced it with language implying that I was the legal guardian. He had counted on the assumption that the court would initially read the complaint as a case of a mother abandoning her own children in public, not an aunt refusing to be ambushed into unpaid childcare. He had weaponized ambiguity. He had tried to trigger the most severe reaction a family court could have. That was when everything snapped into focus. The dropped-off backpacks. The lack of prior messages. The silence after I said no. The way he screamed at me on the phone without letting me explain. The speed with which he filed the lawsuit. This was never about hurt feelings or embarrassment. This was about self-preservation. If he could convince the court that the children were mine, or at least that I had accepted responsibility for them, then he would not be the parent who abandoned his kids. I would be. I felt my hands go cold. Sandra immediately objected, pointing out the factual impossibility of the claim, but the damage had already been done in my mind. I finally saw the entire structure of his scheme. He had planned this from the moment I refused him. If the spa staff had simply handed the children to me, he would have gotten his free babysitting. If the police had been called, he would have redirected the blame. Either way, I was supposed to lose. I looked across the courtroom at my brother, really looked at him this time. He avoided my eyes, staring straight ahead with a rigid expression that suddenly made sense. This was not panic. This was calculation. He had rehearsed this version of events. He had convinced himself that this narrative was clever enough, slippery enough, to hold. The judge began asking questions. Clarifying questions. The kind that dismantle lies layer by layer. She asked about birth records. Custody documents. Dependency filings. My brother's attorney scrambled, attempting to reframe, to soften, to redirect. But the more they spoke, the clearer it became that the accusation was not a misunderstanding. It was intentional. I felt something inside me crack open. This was not just about forcing me to babysit. This was not even about revenge for embarrassment. My brother had been willing to label me as an unfit parent, to put my name into a system that could follow me for the rest of my life, to risk investigations, black marks, and irreversible damage, all to avoid admitting that he had abandoned his own children outside a spa. The puzzle pieces locked together so cleanly it was horrifying. The fake narrative. The rushed filing. The distorted language. The confidence he carried into court. I finally understood everything at once, and the understanding hit so hard it left me dizzy. I sat there, staring forward, my pulse roaring in my ears, my body frozen while my mind raced through the implications. If this had worked, if even one official had accepted his version without scrutiny, my life could have been derailed permanently. And in that moment, as the full picture settled into place, I was unrealistically, violently shocked, not just by what he had done, but by how close he had come to succeeding. Update 3. The day the judge delivered her final ruling, the courtroom was still and thick with tension, like the air before a violent storm. I sat upright in my seat, every muscle locked in place, clutching the edges of the bench so tightly my knuckles turned white. My attorney Sandra was composed, flipping through the final paperwork with calm precision, but I could feel her watching the judge's eyes as the verdict came down. She had done everything she could. Now it was out of our hands. The evidence had been irrefutable. There were time-stamped security camera recordings from the spa lobby clearly showing I never exited the building once I checked in. The spa's attendance logs documented my presence from 11:02 a.m. until nearly 6 p.m. The front desk staff and the head of security had both provided statements affirming that I had no idea any children were outside. The police report detailed how the boys were found sitting on the bench, unsupervised and confused, with no adult in sight and no instructions on what to do. Even the officer who responded testified that the children could not explain why they were there, only that their dad said their aunt would find them. The lie collapsed under the weight of facts. The court saw through the manipulation. The judge, a woman with no patience for theatrics, called my brother's behavior negligent, deliberate, and emotionally harmful to the children. She emphasized how serious it was to falsely accuse someone of parental neglect and how dangerous it was to weaponize the system to cover up personal irresponsibility. She used words like disturbing, reckless, and deceitful. The silence on my brother's side of the room was deafening. When the ruling was read aloud, I felt my breath finally return. I had won. But the cost was something I could never truly measure. My brother stood pale and stiff beside his attorney, completely still except for the way his jaw kept clenching. I could tell he had not expected it to end this way. He had spun his lie so tightly, repeated it to himself so many times, that he must have believed it could become truth if he pushed hard enough. He thought he was clever. But now he looked like a man who had dug a trap only to fall into it headfirst. The judge ordered a temporary suspension of his parental rights pending further review from Child Protective Services. The decision was not taken lightly. It was a direct consequence of him abandoning his children in public without telling anyone, and then lying about it in court. As I walked out of the courtroom, the tension followed me like a shadow. I felt no triumph. No relief. Just exhaustion. But then I heard the sharp voice echoing down the hallway, and I turned. It was his wife. She had just arrived, her face flushed with confusion and fury. Her eyes locked on mine, wide with disbelief. She had not known. She had not even been aware there was a court case. My brother had hidden everything from her. The spa incident. The legal complaint. The hearing. She had been left completely in the dark. And now, she was being handed her children in the middle of a courthouse, with only a social worker and a court officer to explain what had just unfolded. The anger radiating off her was unmistakable. She took the boys without saying a word to me, shielding them from the scene with one arm while gripping her phone with the other, her fingers flying across the screen with a sense of controlled fury. I knew what that meant. She had just found out how deep the betrayal went. The fact that her husband had not only endangered their children but had also tried to shift the blame onto someone else, and then lied about it in front of a judge, was something she would never forgive. That was the look of a woman whose trust had just been obliterated. I did not wait around to see what she would say to him. I left the courthouse and stepped out into the cool Dallas air. The city moved around me like nothing had happened. Cars passed. People walked. The world kept spinning. But something inside me had changed permanently. I had grown up believing that family was a bond built on shared history, loyalty, and mutual care. I had spent years tolerating my brother's selfishness, brushing off his manipulations as thoughtless or immature. But what he had done in this courtroom was not a lapse in judgment. It was something darker. Something calculated. Something unforgivable. From that day on, I never spoke to him again. He reached out a few times in the beginning. Short texts. Cold attempts to pretend the court case had been misunderstood or blown out of proportion. He never apologized. Not truly. Not once. He just wanted things to return to normal. But I had no interest in pretending that normal ever existed between us. I blocked his number. I deleted every message. I scrubbed his presence from my life like removing a stain that never should have been there in the first place. Some wounds are not meant to be healed. Some people are not meant to be forgiven. And some lessons are only learned after they try to destroy you and fail.